Have you ever been going about your day when, out of nowhere, someone just pops into your head? Maybe it's an old friend, a past crush, or even someone you barely talk to, but for some reason, their face, their voice, or a specific moment with them just floods your mind. And then, just when you shake it off, boom, your phone buzzes. It's them. Coincidence? Maybe. But what if I told you this happens way more often than we realize? According to research, 86% of people have reported experiencing this strange mental connection with someone at least once. Some even say they were thinking about a person seconds before that person called or texted them. But here's where it gets even crazier. Many of these people hadn't spoken in weeks, months, or even years. So what's really going on here? Let me tell you a quick story. A friend of mine, Jake, once told me about an ex he hadn't spoken to in over a year. One random night while watching TV, he suddenly got this overwhelming feeling of nostalgia. For no reason at all, he remembered a small, random moment, the way she used to laugh when he messed up cooking dinner. He hadn't thought about that in months. It was so random he even laughed it off. But 10 minutes later, his phone lit up. This is what God does to take focus off ourselves. It was her. She had texted, "Hey, this is weird, but I just saw something that reminded me of you, and I felt like I had to reach out." Now let me ask you something. Has this ever happened to you? Have you ever been thinking about someone only to have them appear in your life shortly after? And if it's happening so often, doesn't it make you wonder, what if it's not just in your head? Psychologists suggest that when two people have a strong emotional connection, whether it's love, friendship, or even an unresolved bond, their subconscious minds stay linked in ways we don't fully understand. Some even believe that thoughts carry energy, and when you think about someone intensely enough, they can feel it on some level, prompting them to think about you too. And that's why these random thoughts might not be random at all. Imagine this. You're sitting in a cafe, scrolling through your phone, when suddenly you get this urge to check someone's social media, someone you haven't thought about in weeks. You open their profile, but just as you do, a notification pops up. They just liked an old post of yours. What are the chances? Or maybe you wake up from a dream about someone you haven't spoken to in ages, and then, out of nowhere, they send you a "hey, long time no talk" message later that day. So here's the big question. Is this just our minds playing tricks on us, or is there something more to it? Scientists have studied the idea of telepathic connections for decades. Some claim it's all about pattern recognition. Our brains pick up on subtle cues and coincidences more than we realize. Others argue it's a deeper form of subconscious communication, something beyond what we can scientifically explain. But whether you believe in energy, intuition, or just plain luck, one thing is clear: it happens too often to ignore. And let's be honest, when this happens to you, it feels real. You can't shake that eerie feeling that maybe, just maybe, the person you're thinking about is also thinking about you at that exact moment. So what if it's happening right now? What if the person who just crossed your mind is thinking about you too? Let me know in the comments, have you ever experienced this? You ever notice how you start picking up little things from someone you spend a lot of time with? Maybe it's the way they say a certain word, their laugh, or even their exact way of texting. But here's where it gets interesting. What if you start mirroring someone without even realizing it? And what if they're doing the same with you? Studies have shown that when two people have a strong emotional or psychological connection, their behaviors start syncing subconsciously. In fact, research in psychology suggests that people who are deeply connected unknowingly copy each other's body language, speech patterns, and even facial expressions. It's called the chameleon effect, and it's way more common than you think. Let me tell you a real story. A guy named Mark once told me about this girl he had a crush on in college. They weren't dating, but they had that undeniable connection. Those lingering stares, the inside jokes, the playful arguments. One day he was out with friends when he caught himself using a phrase he never used before. It was something she always said. He laughed it off, thinking, "Wow, I really spend too much time with her." But then something weird happened. A few days later, they were sitting together, and she casually dropped one of his signature phrases, something only he said all the time. He froze for a second and asked, "Wait, when did you start saying that?" She paused, thought for a second, and then laughed. "Oh my God, I think I got it from you." Now that might not seem like a big deal at first, but here's the question. How often does this actually happen? And is it really just a coincidence? Think about it. When you really connect with someone, you don't just talk to them, you sync with them. Your words, your movements, even your emotions start aligning in ways you don't even notice. Ever been with someone and found yourself sitting in the exact same position as them, crossed arms, leaning the same way, mirroring their gestures? That's not random, that's your subconscious pulling you closer. Now, here's where it gets even crazier. A study from the University of California found that when two people feel a strong connection, their heart rates and even breathing patterns start syncing up, without them even realizing it. That's right, your bodies literally align with each other. And if that's happening, do you really think it's just an accident when you start picking up their words, their habits, or their little quirks? Let's take it one step further. Have you ever been thinking about a specific food or a movie you wanted to watch, and then, without you even mentioning it, that exact person brings it up, almost like they read your mind? Some might say it's just a shared interest, but what if it's something deeper? There are thousands of stories of couples, best friends, even siblings, people with strong bonds, who somehow just know what the other is thinking or feeling. They text each other at the same time. They randomly get a gut feeling when something's wrong. And the more connected they are, the stronger these unspoken signals become. So what if this is happening to you right now? What if the reason you've been noticing yourself picking up someone's habits isn't just because you're around them, but because they have been subconsciously picking up on you too? Maybe the fact that you're thinking about them more than usual means they're doing the exact same thing. Tell me, have you ever caught yourself mirroring someone's words, gestures, or even emotions without realizing it? Drop a comment below. I want to hear your story. Hey yo, ever get that weird feeling like someone's watching you? You're sitting somewhere, maybe at a cafe, in a meeting, or even just walking down the street, and suddenly you feel it, that unshakable sense that someone's eyes are on you. You turn your head, and sure enough, you lock eyes with them. But here's the crazy part. They weren't just glancing at you. They were already looking before you even noticed. Now, is that just a coincidence, or is something else happening? According to a study published in the journal Consciousness and Cognition, people can often sense when they're being watched, even when they have no logical way of knowing. The study found that nearly 94% of people have experienced this phenomenon at least once. Some scientists believe it's because of subtle environmental cues, but others argue there's something deeper at play, something that suggests a hidden connection between two minds. And if this has ever happened to you with one specific person over and over again, then it might not be random at all. Let me tell you a quick story. There's this guy named Ryan who used to work in an office. Every day he'd sit at his desk, focused on his work, until he'd suddenly feel this odd sensation, like someone was watching him. He'd look up, and across the room, there she was, this girl from another department, staring right at him. The first time he thought nothing of it. The second time he found it funny. But by the third, fourth, fifth time, it started to mess with his head. The weirdest part? He was doing it too. He'd catch himself glancing over at her without thinking, only to realize she was already looking back. And here's where it gets interesting. When he finally got the nerve to talk to her, she admitted something that completely threw him off. She said, "It's weird, but I kept feeling like I had to look up, like something was telling me to." Now, stop and think for a second. Have you ever been in a situation where you just knew someone was looking at you? Or maybe it's the other way around. You keep looking at someone, drawn to them, without even realizing why, and somehow they always seem to meet your gaze? This isn't just body language or chance. Some researchers believe it has to do with unconscious attraction. When two people are deeply curious about each other, their brains automatically signal their bodies to check in, over and over again. And if the feeling is mutual, both people start responding to that pull. But what if it's even bigger than that? Some spiritual theories suggest that when two people think about each other at the same time, their energy naturally pulls them into each other's awareness. That's why, out of a room full of people, your eyes somehow always find that one person. It's not just about attraction, it's about connection. Imagine this. You're in a crowded event, hundreds of people moving around, talking, laughing, but for some reason your brain just knows exactly where they are, even if they're not near you, and then, as if on cue, you turn your head, and so do they. So, here's the big question. If this keeps happening with the same person, what does it actually mean? Is it just your brain playing tricks? Or is it possible that in that exact moment, they're thinking about you too? Drop a comment below. Has this ever happened to you? You ever have a moment where you just know something's about to happen before it actually does? Like a weird gut feeling that tells you to check your phone, and just as you do, a message pops up from the exact person you were thinking about? Most people would call it a coincidence, but what if it's not? According to research published in the Journal of Parapsychology, 68% of people have experienced what's called anticipatory thinking, that eerie sensation of knowing someone will reach out before it happens. Scientists believe our brains pick up on patterns so subtly that we don't even realize it. But here's the part no one talks about. Why does this only seem to happen with certain people? Let me tell you a story. A girl named Emily once told me about a guy she had feelings for, but never officially dated. They had that unspoken connection, the kind where you don't need to say much to feel something. Life got busy, and they eventually lost touch. No calls, no texts, no updates. Months passed. Then one night she was lying in bed, scrolling through her phone, when out of nowhere she had this overwhelming urge to check her messages. Not because she got a notification, just an instinct. And as soon as she opened her chat, there it was, a message from him, the first one in months. His text? "Hey, I don't know why, but I suddenly felt like I needed to reach out. Now let me ask you something. Has this ever happened to you? Have you ever randomly thought about someone you haven't spoken to in ages, and then, as if the universe is messing with you, they text or call you out of nowhere? And if so, what are the odds?" Some people believe this is just selective memory, that we only notice the moments when it happens and ignore the times when it doesn't. But if that were true, why does it happen most with the people we feel closest to? Think about this. Have you ever been about to text someone only for them to beat you to it, sending you a message at the exact same moment? You might laugh it off, saying, "I was just about to text you." But what if that wasn't just a funny accident? What if it was proof that in that moment your minds were actually in sync? Researchers at Harvard conducted a study on social synchronization and found that when two people are emotionally connected, their brains begin to mirror each other's thought patterns, even when they're apart. That means when you're thinking about someone intensely, it's possible they're picking up on that energy too without even realizing it. Now, here's where it gets even crazier. Ever had a sudden wave of emotion that didn't feel like it was yours? Like you were going about your day totally fine, and then out of nowhere you felt this heavy sadness, or maybe an unexplained excitement. Some experts believe this happens when two people have a strong emotional tie. Even from miles away, your subconscious can feel what the other person is going through. So what if that's why you suddenly get the urge to text someone? What if that's why out of nowhere you feel the need to reach out, because at that exact moment they were thinking about you too? And if this has been happening with the same person over and over again, is it really just a coincidence? Tell me in the comments, have you ever had a moment where you just knew someone was about to text or call you? You ever wake up feeling off for no reason? Maybe you're suddenly anxious, restless, or even sad, but you can't quite figure out why. Then, later that day, you find out that someone close to you, someone you've been thinking about, was going through something heavy at that exact moment. Coincidence? Maybe. But what if it's not? Studies show that people in close emotional relationships can unknowingly share moods, even when they're apart. According to research from the American Psychological Association, emotions are contagious, not just in person but over distance, meaning if you're deeply connected with someone, you might be picking up on what they're feeling without them ever saying a word. And here's where it gets even weirder. A guy named Chris once told me about his long-distance best friend Sarah. They lived in different states, hadn't seen each other in months, but they were still close. One night, Chris was hanging out with friends having a great time when suddenly his mood completely flipped. He felt this strange sadness hit him out of nowhere. He wasn't thinking about anything bad, nothing had happened, but he just couldn't shake it. 2 hours later, his phone buzzed. It was Sarah. "I know this is random, but I really needed to talk to you. Tonight's been awful." Chris asked her what happened, and she told him she'd had a breakdown earlier that night. At the exact same time, his mood changed. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever felt an emotion that didn't seem like yours? A wave of sadness, happiness, or even nervousness that came out of nowhere? And later, you find out that someone you care about was feeling the same thing? Some people call this emotional intuition. Others say it's energetic connection. That when two people have a deep bond, their emotions can travel between them, no matter the distance. It's why mothers sometimes wake up in the middle of the night when their child is in trouble. It's why best friends can tell when something is wrong, even over text. And it's why, sometimes, when you suddenly think of someone, it's not just you missing them. It's them missing you too. Think about it. How many times have you been sitting there, minding your own business, when out of nowhere someone crosses your mind? Maybe it's an ex, a close friend, or someone you haven't spoken to in a long time. And then, out of the blue, they text you, call you, or even post something that perfectly matches what you were just thinking. Some scientists argue that this is just our brains making connections where there aren't any. But if that's true, then why do these moments feel so real? Why does it happen most with the people we have the strongest emotional ties to? What if, at the exact moment you're thinking about someone, they're feeling something intense, and your mind is picking up on it? What if this is why you suddenly feel drawn to check their social media, reach out, or just sit there wondering, why do I keep thinking about them today? And if this keeps happening with the same person over and over again, maybe, just maybe, it means you're still connected in a way that words can't explain. Have you ever experienced this? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story. You ever find yourself humming a song, and then, out of nowhere, someone near you starts humming the exact same tune, without either of you realizing how it started? Or maybe you have a random thought about a person, and the next thing you know, they're mentioning that exact thing in a conversation. At first it seems small, just a funny little coincidence, but then it keeps happening over and over again, almost like your minds are somehow connected, running on the same wavelength. According to a study in Nature Neuroscience, when two people engage in deep conversation, their brainwaves actually start syncing up, as if their minds are literally aligning with each other. But here's the wild part. Scientists now believe this can happen even when two people are apart. So, what does that mean for you? Let me tell you a story. A woman named Jessica told me about this guy, Ethan. They weren't dating, but they had that unspoken connection. Late-night conversations, inside jokes, the kind of chemistry you don't have with just anyone. But life pulled them in different directions, and they lost touch. No calls, no texts, nothing. Then, one day, Jessica was journaling. Out of nowhere, she wrote down a specific memory about Ethan, something she hadn't thought about in years. It was random, but for some reason, it felt important. An hour later, her phone buzzed. It was Ethan. His message? "Hey, this is super random, but I was just thinking about that time we..." And the crazy part? He described the exact same memory she had just written down. Now stop and think for a second. Has this ever happened to you? Have you ever had a random, out-of-nowhere thought about someone, only for them to bring up the same thing shortly after? Or maybe you were thinking of texting someone, and just as you reach for your phone, boom, they text you first. Is that just chance? Or is something else happening? Some people believe this is proof of mental synchronization, that when two people have a strong emotional bond, their subconscious thoughts start mirroring each other, even from miles away. Think about it. If your brains are literally syncing up when you're talking, what's stopping that connection from lasting even when you're apart? And if this keeps happening with the same person, if your thoughts, ideas, and even emotions keep aligning, maybe it's not just a coincidence. Maybe it's proof that somewhere in their mind, they're thinking about you too. So tell me, have you ever experienced this? Drop a comment below.